Hazmat section reading summary, pages 66 to 77. The purpose of the regulations. The Federal Hazardous Materials Regulations exist for three overlapping reasons. First, they make sure hazardous materials are contained, shippers have to package things correctly, and drivers have to load, haul, and unload them without letting anything escape. Second, they make sure the risk is communicated to everyone who might come into contact with the shipment. That means correct labels on packages, correct placards on the vehicle, accurate shipping papers, and emergency response information that's easy to find. Third, they make sure the people and equipment involved are actually safe to do the job, which is why you have to pass a written test before you're allowed to haul hazardous materials at all. The rules are officially found in 49 CFR Parts 100 through 185, commonly just called 49 CFR 100-185. It's worth knowing that the hazardous materials table inside these regulations isn't a complete list of every hazardous substance in the world. Whether something counts as hazardous also depends on its physical characteristics and on the shipper's own determination. Training on all of this has to happen at least once every 3 years, and your employer has to keep records of your training for as long as you're working with Hazmat, plus 90 days after. Who does what? Shipper, carrier, driver. 3 parties share responsibility for a hazmat shipment, and the test wants you to know where each one's job starts and stops. The shipper is the party who determines the identification number, the proper shipping name, the hazard class, the packing group, and the correct packaging, labeling, and placarding for the load, and then actually does the packaging, marking, and labeling, prepares the shipping papers, and supplies the placards. The shipper also signs a certification on the shipping paper stating that everything was prepared according to the rules, although there are 2 exceptions to that. A private carrier hauling their own product doesn't need it, and neither does a situation where the carrier supplied the package itself, like a cargo tank. The carrier's job is to actually move the shipment from the shipper to its destination. Before that happens, the carrier is supposed to check that the shipper described, marked, and labeled everything correctly, and the carrier has the right, and the obligation, to refuse a shipment that wasn't prepared properly. If an accident or incident happens involving the hazmat, it's the carrier's job to report it to the appropriate government agency. As the driver, your responsibilities sit downstream of both of those. You need to confirm the shipper actually did identify, mark, and label the materials properly, refuse to haul any package that's leaking, placard your vehicle correctly when you load, transport the shipment without unnecessary delay, follow every special rule that applies to what you're carrying, and keep the shipping papers and emergency response information exactly where they're supposed to be. Communicating the hazard. Every hazardous material falls into one of 9 hazard classes, and knowing them is foundational to everything else in this section. Class 1 covers explosives, broken into subdivisions 1.1 through 1.6 depending on how severe the explosion risk is. Dynamite, flares, fireworks, and ammunition all fall somewhere in this class. Class 2 covers gases, split into 2.1 flammable, 2.2 non-flammable, and 2.3 poisonous or toxic. Propane, helium, and fluorine are the classic examples. Class 3 is flammable liquids, like gasoline. Class 4 is flammable solids, split into 3 types depending on whether the material just burns easily, ignites spontaneously, or becomes dangerous specifically when wet. Ammonium picrate, white phosphorus, and sodium are the textbook examples of each. Class 5 covers oxidizers and organic peroxides, things like ammonium nitrate. Class 6 covers poisons and infectious substances, potassium cyanide and anthrax. Class 7 is radioactive material like uranium. Class 8 is corrosives, like battery fluid. And Class 9 is a catch-all miscellaneous hazardous materials category, covering things like PCBs. Outside the 9 numbered classes, you'll also see ORMD, other regulated material, domestic, covering things like food flavorings and medicines, and combustible liquids like fuel oil. Shippers put diamond-shaped warning labels directly on packages so that anyone handling them can immediately see the hazard. If a package is too small or oddly shaped for the label to fit, compressed gas cylinders are the classic example. the label goes on a securely attached tag instead. To figure out what a given material actually is, shippers, carriers, and drivers rely on three official lists: the Hazardous Materials Table in Section 172.101, Appendix A to that section, the list of hazardous substances and reportable quantities, and Appendix B, the list of marine pollutants. The Hazardous Materials Table itself is dense, it's organized into columns, and a few of them matter for the test. Column 4 gives the identification number, always preceded by UN or NA. Column 5 gives the packing group in Roman numerals. Column 6 lists which warning label or labels the package needs, and some materials need more than one label if they present more than one hazard. There are also special symbol codes that show up in column 1 of the table. A plus symbol means the listed shipping name, hazard class, and packing group apply regardless of whether the material technically meets that hazard class's definition, and a G means the shipping name is generic and needs a specific technical name added to the shipping paper. To decide which placards a vehicle needs, you really only need to know three things: the hazard class of what you're carrying, the amount you're shipping, and the total combined weight of every hazard class on the vehicle. The shipping paper itself is the document that ties all of this together. It has to include page numbers if there's more than one page, with the first page stating something like page 1 of 4, a proper shipping description for each hazardous material being carried, a shipper's certification signed by the shipper attesting the shipment was prepared correctly, and an emergency response phone number that responders can call to get information about the material in a spill or fire. The basic description on the paper always follows the same order: identification number, then proper shipping name, then hazard class or division, then packing group. When a shipping paper lists both hazardous and non-hazardous items together, the hazardous ones have to be entered first, highlighted in a contrasting color, or marked with an X, or RQ if a reportable quantity is involved, in a column captioned HM. Package markings have to match the shipping paper. The shipper is required to put the shipping name, the identification number, and the correct hazard labels directly on the package, along with the shipper's and consignee's name and address. As a driver, it's worth comparing what's on the shipping paper against what's actually printed on the package. If something doesn't match, or if you're not familiar with the material, that's a reason to stop and ask the shipper before you load it. Recognizing that you're dealing with hazardous materials in the first place comes down to a handful of clues. Does the shipping paper have a proper shipping name, hazard class, and identification number listed? Is there an X or RQ in the HM column? Does the type of business, a paint dealer, a chemical supply house, a fireworks dealer, suggest hazmat is likely? Are there diamond-shaped labels or placards visible on site? These are the signs to watch for even before you get to the paperwork. If you're hauling hazardous waste specifically, you're required to sign, by hand, a uniform hazardous waste manifest and treat it exactly like a shipping paper. You can only hand that waste off to another registered carrier or a registered disposal or treatment facility, never to just anyone. Placarding. Placards are the diamond-shaped warning signs that go on the outside of the vehicle, and they exist specifically so first responders and other drivers can see at a glance what kind of hazard is on board. You're required to attach the correct placards to your vehicle before you drive it. The only exception is that you're allowed to move an improperly placarded vehicle briefly in an emergency, specifically to protect life or property. A properly placarded vehicle needs at least 4 identical placards, one each on the front, rear, and both sides, and every placard has to be readable from all 4 directions. They need to be at least 10 3/4 inches square, mounted in the diamond square on point orientation. There are 2 placard tables, and the distinction between them matters. Table 1 materials require a placard no matter how small the amount being hauled is. This includes explosives 1.1, 1.2, and 1.3, poison gas, 2.3, dangerous when wet materials, 4.3, temperature-controlled organic peroxides, 5.2, poison or toxic inhalation hazards, 6.1 in Zone A or B, and radioactive materials labeled yellow 3. Table 2 materials only require a placard once the total combined weight of all Table 2 hazmat on the vehicle reaches 1,001 pounds or more. This covers things like explosives 1.4 through 1.6, flammable and non-flammable gases, flammable liquids, flammable solids, oxidizers, ordinary poisons, corrosives, and Class 9 materials. Bulk packaging, meaning any single container with a capacity of 119 gallons or more, always has to be placarded, even if it's carrying nothing but the residue of a previous load. Loading and unloading. Before you load or unload anything, set your parking brake so the vehicle can't move. Keep hazardous materials away from heat sources, since many products become more dangerous when heated. If you spot a leaking or damaged container, don't load it and don't drive with it. Moving a vehicle with leaking hazmat on board is illegal. Once everything is loaded, containers need to be braced so they can't shift, slide, or fall during the trip, and you should never open a package or transfer material from one package to another while you're in transit. The one exception is that you're allowed to empty a cargo tank, just not any other type of package. Smoking is banned around certain classes while loading or unloading explosives, flammable gas, flammable liquids, flammable solids, and oxidizers. A big part of loading correctly is knowing what can't be loaded together. The manuals do not load table, figure 9.9, lays out several combinations that are simply forbidden in the same vehicle. Division 6.1 or 2.3 poison labeled material can't ride with animal or human food, unless the poison package is overpacked in an approved way, and it's worth knowing that mouthwash, toothpaste, and skin creams don't count as food for this rule. Division 2.3 poisonous gas zone A, or Division 6.1 poison liquids in packing group I zone A, can't ride with Division 1.1, 1.2, or 1.3 explosives, Division 5.1 oxidizers, Class 3 flammable liquids, Class 8 corrosive liquids, Division 5.2 organic peroxides, Division 1.5 blasting agents, Division 2.1 flammable gases, or Class 4 flammable solids. Charged storage batteries can't ride with Division 1.1 explosives. Class 1 detonating primers can't ride with any other explosives unless those explosives are in authorized containers or packages. Division 6.1 cyanides or cyanide mixtures, things like inorganic cyanides, silver cyanide, or sodium cyanide, can't ride with acids, corrosives, or other acidic materials capable of releasing hydrocyanic acid. And nitric acid, Class 8, can't ride with any other material unless the nitric acid itself is loaded so it's never above anything else. Corrosive liquids get their own additional set of restrictions beyond that table. They can never be loaded next to or above Division 1.4 explosives, Division 4.1 flammable solids, Division 4.3 dangerous when wet materials, Class 5 oxidizers, or Division 2.3 Zone B poisonous gases. And they can never be loaded with Division 1.1 or 1.2 explosives, Division 1.3 explosives, Division 1.5 blasting agents, Division 2.3 Zone A poisonous gases, Division 4.2 spontaneously combustible materials, or Division 6.1 packing group I Zone A poison liquids. Cargo heaters are generally forbidden when you're hauling explosives, flammable gas, or flammable liquids, unless you've specifically read the rules that allow an exception. And several classes, explosives, flammable solids, and oxidizers, can't be hauled as an overhang or tailgate load. They have to go in a closed cargo space unless every package is fire and water resistant and covered with a resistant tarp. Different classes have their own specific loading precautions. With explosives, you turn the engine off before loading, disable any cargo heaters, check the cargo space for anything sharp that could damage the load, and use a non-metallic or non-ferrous floor liner for the more sensitive divisions. With corrosives, if you're loading breakable containers by hand, you load them one at a time, right side up, without dropping or rolling them, and you never stack nitric acid above anything else. With compressed gas cylinders, if your vehicle doesn't have racks, they need to be either held upright or, if lying down, positioned so the relief valve sits in the vapor space. Radioactive material has its own control mechanism. Every package carries a transport index number, and the combined transport index of everything on a single vehicle can't exceed 50. That number also determines how far the load has to stay from people, cargo compartment partitions, or unexposed film, based on Table A, Figure 9.10 in the manual. As the transport index climbs, so does the required separation distance. A package with a transport index of none needs 0 feet of separation from anything, but by the time you reach an index of 1.1 to 5.0, you need at least 3 feet from people, 4 feet from cargo compartment partitions on one measure, up to 11 feet on another, and at least 2 feet in the tightest column. The distances keep climbing from there. An index of 10.1 to 20.0 requires roughly 5 to 22 feet depending on which column applies, and the top bracket in the table, 40.1 to 50.0, requires as much as 36 feet of separation in the most restrictive column. The exact number depends on which of the table's measurement columns applies to your situation, so if you're ever in a position where you need the precise figure, pull the actual table rather than relying on memory. The point to retain for the test is simply that higher transport index means greater required distance, and that 50 is the hard ceiling for a single vehicle. Bulk packaging. Bulk packaging refers to containers with a capacity over 119 gallons for liquids, or similarly large capacities for solids and gases. There are two main types you'll encounter. A cargo tank is bulk packaging that's permanently attached to the vehicle. It stays on the truck while you're loading and unloading it. The two most common types are the MC306, used for liquids, and the MC331, used for gases. A portable tank, by contrast, is bulk packaging that isn't permanently attached. The product goes in or out while the tank is off the vehicle, and the tank is then placed onto the vehicle for the actual transport. Whoever is loading or unloading a cargo tank needs a qualified attendant present the entire time. That person has to stay alert, keep a clear, unobstructed view of the tank, remain within 25 feet of it at all times, understand the hazards of what's inside, know what to do if something goes wrong, and be authorized and able to actually move the tank if needed. With flammable liquids specifically, you turn the engine off before loading or unloading, unless you need it running to operate a pump, and you have to properly ground the tank before you open the filling hole and keep it grounded until after you close it back up. With compressed gas, the liquid discharge valve stays closed except during active loading or unloading, and you disconnect every hose and coupling before you attempt to move the tank at all. Driving and parking rules. If you're hauling Division 1.1, 1.2, or 1.3 explosives, you can never park within 5 feet of the traveled part of the road, and, except briefly, for something like fueling, you can't park within 300 feet of a bridge, tunnel, building, a place where people gather, or an open fire. Some areas designate official safe havens specifically for parking vehicles loaded with explosives overnight or for extended periods. If you're hauling a placarded load that isn't explosives, you're allowed to park within 5 feet of the road only if your work genuinely requires it, and only briefly. Someone always has to be watching the vehicle while it's parked on a public road or shoulder. Never use burning signals like flares or fuses around a vehicle carrying flammable liquids, flammable gas, or Division 1.1, 1.2, or 1.3 explosives. Use reflective triangles or red electric lights instead. If you're hauling Division 1.1, 1.2, or 1.3 explosives, you're required to have a written route plan and to actually follow it, and you should generally avoid populated areas, tunnels, narrow streets, and alleys with a placarded load even if it means a longer route. No smoking within 25 feet of a placarded cargo tank carrying flammable liquids or flammable gas, and no smoking within 25 feet of any vehicle carrying explosives, flammable liquids, or flammable solids more broadly. Turn your engine off before refueling a vehicle that's carrying hazardous materials, and make sure someone is at the fuel nozzle the entire time controlling the flow. The power unit of any placarded vehicle needs a fire extinguisher rated 10 BC or higher. You're required to check your tires at the start of every trip and every time you stop. Using an actual tire pressure gauge is the only acceptable method, and you can't drive on a tire that's flat or leaking except to reach the nearest safe place to fix it. Shipping papers need to stay within your reach while you're driving, with your seatbelt fastened, or in a pouch on the driver's door. When you're out of the vehicle, they go on the driver's seat or stay in that door pouch. At railroad crossings, you're required to stop if your vehicle is placarded, if you're carrying any amount of chlorine at all, or if you have cargo tanks on board, loaded or empty. You stop between 15 and 50 feet before the nearest rail, and you're not allowed to shift gears while you're actually crossing the tracks. One more equipment rule worth remembering specifically: if you're transporting chlorine in a cargo tank, you're required to carry an approved gas mask in the vehicle, plus an emergency kit for controlling leaks at the dome cover plate fittings on the tank. This is separate from your general fire extinguisher requirement and applies specifically to chlorine cargo tank hauls. Emergencies. If you're involved in a crash or discover an incident, your job is to keep bystanders away from the scene, limit the spread of the material only if you can do so safely, and communicate the danger clearly to any emergency responders who arrive, including handing over your shipping papers and emergency response information right away. A practical checklist: check on your driving partner, keep the shipping papers with you, keep people upwind and at a distance, warn others of the danger, call for help, and follow whatever instructions your employer gives you. Don't attempt to fight a hazardous materials fire unless you've had the specific training and have the right equipment. You might be able to use an extinguisher to stop a minor fire from spreading to the cargo before real firefighters arrive, but that's the limit. If you find trailer doors are hot, don't open them. Opening them lets in air and can cause the fire to flare up, whereas a closed space often just smolders until help arrives. If you discover a leak or spill, never touch the material and never try to identify it by smell. Toxic gases can damage your sense of smell and hurt or kill you without you ever noticing an odor. If hazmat is actively leaking from your vehicle, don't move it any more than safety genuinely requires. You can reposition off the road and away from crowds if that's safer, but never keep driving in search of a phone or help while material is actively leaking. The carrier bears the cost of any contamination you leave behind. If you do need to send someone else for help, give them a description of the emergency, your exact location and direction of travel, your name and your carrier's name and home city, and the proper shipping name, hazard class, and identification number if you know them. There are 2 emergency numbers worth memorizing. The National Response Center, at 800-424-8802, coordinates emergency response to chemical hazards and should be called for incidents involving a death, an injury requiring hospitalization, property damage over $50,000, an evacuation lasting more than an hour, a major road or facility closure of an hour or more, or any fire, breakage, spillage, or suspected radioactive or biological contamination. Chemtrec, at 800-424-9300, is a separate 24-hour line that gives emergency responders technical information about the physical properties of hazardous materials, and the 2 organizations stay in close contact with each other. What the test actually covers. One detail worth knowing going in: your manual explicitly states that Section 9.8, the glossary of hazmat terms, will not be tested. It's there as a reference if a term trips you up while reading, but you don't need to memorize the formal definitions in it. Everything in Sections 9.1 through 9.7, hazard classes, shipping papers, placarding, loading rules, driving and parking rules, and emergency procedures, is fair game and is where your study time is best spent.